Shooter Brief topic number 3 says, do you know this is how Abibifoɔ Spirituality is treated in Barbados today? I hope I have that right. Abibifoɔ Spirituality is treated in Barbados today. This comes with a link that's going to take us to... Was Cheryl saying something?
Oh, I was just saying Abibifoɔ.
Abibifoɔ, thank you. Thank you very much. Yes, Abibifoɔ. This comes with a link that takes us to Instagram. This is a post by Roan Muhammad and Repair Campaign. He says, members of the Rastafarian Nyabingi Order from St. John, Barbados, spoke on a panel yesterday at the Confronting Codrington Conference. They discussed the need for reparatory justice in Barbados and the Caribbean to address the atrocities of slavery and colonization, especially for those of African-based religions like people of Rastafarian and spiritual Baptist faith who face racist persecution in Barbados and the Caribbean with no apology. So that's the setup for this. We'll listen. Where is it? We'll listen to it and then we'll discuss.
Many years, I worked in the hospitality sector. I gave a lot of strength and energy to what we would consider, let's be honest, the modern day slave plantation. Because we have managed to allow the slave masters to pass their generational wealth so far down the pipeline that we actually work to facilitate our slave masters to this day. So I personally believe, because I can only really speak from my personal experience, that the government of Barbados, although in a way sugarcoating the atrocity that has happened to African-based spiritualities, the reality of it is that you have a whole generation of young people who have skills and talents that they would love to bring forward to the table for the betterment of their community. But in the conversations, they're definitely not included, still ostracized, and there's still a very bad stigma when it comes towards the Rastafari culture, the spiritual Baptists, the Orishas. You still have to deal with a constant, what is the word? They don't have to say it out of their mouth, but you feel the oppression as soon as you walk in the door. So when I think about reparations, I think about the acknowledgement of what has happened, because I'm the type of person, I believe that if you do a heinous crime, you should apologize just as loud as you did the crime. And if you're going to acknowledge what has happened to Black people in the entirety, then I feel like this conversation is just fluff. So for many years, I worked in the hospitality sector. I gave a lot of strength and energy to what we would consider, let's be honest, the modern day slave plantation. Because we have managed to allow the slave masters to pass their generational wealth so far down the pipeline that we actually work to facilitate our slave masters to this day. So I personally believe, because I can only really speak from my personal experience, that the government of Barbados, although in a way sugarcoating the atrocity that has happened to African-based spiritualities, the reality of it is that you have a whole generation of young people who have skills and talents that they would love to bring forward to the table for the betterment of their community. But in the conversations, they're definitely not included, still ostracized, and there's still a very bad stigma when it comes towards the Rastafari culture, the spiritual Baptists, the Orishas. You still have to deal with a constant, what is the word? They don't have to say it out of their mouth, but you feel the oppression as soon as you walk in the door. So when I think about reparations, I think about the acknowledgement of what has happened, because I'm the type of person, I believe that if you do a heinous crime, you should apologize just as loud as you did the crime. And And if you're going to acknowledge what has happened to Black people in the entirety, then I feel like this conversation is just fluff. So for many years,
very interesting conversation being had. That's the Codrington Conference held in Barbados. It's a multidisciplinary conference, so they discussed many different things. One of the panels was reparations, and one set of the panelists was this group speaking on the spirituality systems, African spirituality systems in Barbados that was suppressed under slavery and the Caribbean version of Jim Crow laws and stuff like that. So it's a very interesting thing to bring up in this conference. I would really be interested in hearing about what else was discussed as it relates to this clip, etc. So if you have that out there, shoot that to me so we could follow up on this in the near future. But Sister Cheryl, thank you for correcting me on the Abibifoɔ is the pronunciation of the spirituality. What are your thoughts on what you just saw?
Yeah, the reparations conversation, is there repairing that needs to be done? Of course. In any settler colony, there should be reparations, but I mean, I don't know how I feel about asking my enemy to repair me, because I know, like, war tactics, 101, if you ask for something from your enemy, you better expect that they're going to ask for something back from you. It doesn't make sense, but that's what conquering nations do. And so I'm just a little confused about, like, is she serious about this, or is it just a conversation that they just bringing up because it's like been a huge topic of discussion in the States? I just don't know where the reparations conversation, where they expect it to go, and who they expect them to pay. Like, who do they expect? Which of the colonizers do they expect to pay this? Is it money? It sounded like she wasn't asking for money. It sounded like she was just asking for an apology. It's very unclear. It just sounds like a conversation that they're just having just for conversation's sake. So I'm really confused about it. It's good. I guess it's good that they bring it to the table, but at the end of the day, what are we really talking about?
Yeah, that's well stated there, Sister Cheryl. What are we really talking about? Which is why I kind of said I like to see the remainder of the moment and what else was discussed around this conversation. You asked a very interesting question there. That at the end of the day, I imagine is mostly reparations from Britain, because there was religious persecution after slavery in places like Barbados against folks like the Rastafarians and the spiritual Baptists and stuff like that, the Obeah, etc. I was gonna say, but that was all under the British. Then I remembered, no, some of our people took control of those countries, in the Caribbean in particular, after independence, and they continued the actions against the Rastafarians and the spiritual Baptists, the Obeah spiritualists, etc. So it's are they just asking for an apology from the Barbados Black-run government? I don't know. So it'd be interesting to see the fuller conversation. But with that said, let me hear from Jose. Jose would say,
yeah, I also have a big question mark the apology factor makes me doubt if they are serious about the spirituality. What is it? Is it a new church, or you know, I've seen pretty wild. I believe I've shared it in one of these shows. I've seen pretty wild shit. You know, even quote unquote the evil phenomenon is kind of connected. And then I'm asking, what are we talking about? Are we talking about herbs, or are we talking about people doing people bending time and space? What are we talking about? What is African spirituality in this matter? Are we bringing our thing into the European structure with this apology? I don't understand. Where are our people looking for our people? To be honest, or maybe you can tell, I'm a bit confused.
You know, for a second I thought you had a good point. Are we asking for these apologies as a means of permission, as a means of being accepted into what these other folks got going on? Is that what
that's a good one.
Yeah,
that's a good one. Yeah, the word permission. Yeah, thank you. That's yeah. Bullseye. We want our parking place in the white parking lot. I don't know. I don't know. I'm confused. Where are we looking for us? Literally, where are we looking at the door or the law structure from this white man? Thank you.
yeah. So KW7 in the chat says reparations is hidden behind a bloodshed paywall. Absolutely. Big Happy 262 Plus says usually other Pan-Africanist movements seem to have framed reparations under the idea of sovereignty as opposed, or any objective through statehood as opposed to status quo means. Trigger, I'll ask you to express that again a little bit more clearly, but I think I get the idea of what you're saying. Buana, you've heard everyone, what they had to say and what the chat had to say. What say you?
Yeah, Coco, I think that she is absolutely wrong. I think she's absolutely wrong in petitioning the government in terms, at this point, in terms of African spirituality and reparation. She's confusing a lot of different things here. And it's a lot of different moving parts. So let me explain. So Mia Motley already has a comprehensive plan in terms of what she wants of reparations. I think it's online. Anyone could see it. And it's a tangible plan in terms of what she expects in reparations. She went down the line on various different things. She didn't touch on African spirituality because that's not the government place to recognize a spiritual practice. That is for the practitioners to do that. You know, the government or any government official.
Buana, I'm sorry. Let me interrupt you real quick. Keep your thoughts. But don't these governments proclaim to be Christian nations all the time?
To address that, let me come to that, Coco. Let me come to that. So the job of the government is to govern, but the government is in power based off of popularity. It's a popularity contest. Okay, the majority of Barbadians are Christians. Okay, the majority. So obviously. And the majority of people in power in Barbados, in terms of spirituality, is the Anglican Church or the Baptist Church. So she gonna defer to them first, even in these kinds of matters and issues. And I think that there should be even a separation in that. But the sister right here, what I would suggest is, since she is a person like, I would compare her to the Mormons in America. The Mormons in America had a serious fight against the government in terms of religious practices and freedoms in America and being recognized. In fact, they moved to several different states before they established the state of Utah. When they went to Utah, they built on that spiritual philosophy. They was able to garner enough economic power, so much so that the government had to recognize them. It's the same thing with the Amish. The Amish are people who decide, as spiritual people, to live away from the so-called off of the grid. They live away from, but they are still respected because their community is such where they could live in a society, but they are basically off the grid. They don't need the government, but the government still have to defer to them. They still exist in the society itself. What I would suggest, what I understand, and it was a fight to get to that point. I understand that they want to be the Rastafarians and the African spiritualists and whatever, but you follow the course of the people who have been successful in what they have done. I would suggest that the Rastafarian community and the African spiritualists and all these people could come together collectively, if that's their wish, to if they want to live in the Bayesian society, to do the same things that the other people have done to be successful. Because if the leader of the country, who was also, by the way, a victim of the slave trade, so you can't go to Mia Motley and ask her to apologize because she was a victim herself. That makes no sense. So I would say that you should go and independently start with because you don't need to ask the God. As long as you legally could practice your faith inside the country, then you build off of that and build your community up and get it strong enough to force the government to recognize you. There are the people in you. Don't you know the Mormon Church is the wealthiest is the wealthiest religious institution in America? It's the wealthiest institution in America. They can't be ignored. They can't be ignored. And it's not all about money. It's about the fact that people collectively could come together to do something without always having to pull on the government coattail or be recognized by them. Because you don't want to fit in that system anyways. You don't want to be a part of that system anyway. It's contradictory when you want to say you want to live outside of Babylon, but you want Babylon to recognize you. Huh? I'm scratching my head. So if you say you want to live and be independent and live an African lifestyle and liberty and all these other things, you need to organize your people and live in that kind of system and structure. So much, and then if you want to, because I don't know if Rastafarians or Anabaptists or African spiritualists believe in proselytizing their faith, because you have to trigger the minds of the people who live in Barbados too. The politician's job is to cater to the majority of the people, not the minority of the people. Not the minority. The minority of people should be recognized, but in reality, it's a popularity contest. And to maintain and gain power and remain in power, you want to go with the majority of the people. And the majority of people are not Rastafarian, African spiritualists, and Anabaptists. So what do you think Mia Motley is going to do as a practical decision? As a practical decision, who wants to remain in power? And like I say, if you want reparations, I think that in terms of recognize African spirituality, I think that you should petition Mia Motley, sit down and have a conversation with her and tell her to include that as far as asking for reparations. Have that as something that should be included. But you yourself, as a spiritualist who want to live away from the Babylonian society, need to build your society. Build your society first. The cart can't come before the horse. The horse has to come first. So if you're living outside and off of the grid, build your community first. And then whatever comes after, they're going to come to you. The American government had to go to the Mormons after a while. After all the fighting turmoil, the fact that they were so successful and garnering billions and billions of dollars, they couldn't be ignored. You had to create a state called Utah that represents the majority of people in that community who was Mormons. So I think that this is really asked back. Let me say asked back. I disagree with the sister in this way of going about trying to get what she is trying to get established in Barbados.
So I didn't want to interrupt one or two times during his talk. But this is where that children's game, telephone, was so important. See, the way Buana responded to it is that the woman in the video is trying to receive recognition for her religious faith. That's not what's happening. She wants it to be recognized that there were damages done to people of her faith historically over the years, and that there should be some reparative justice. To me, it sounds like she's asking for a simple "I'm sorry." Just like people were asking for Obama when he was the president of the United States, a so-called black guy, to apologize for slavery. Some people just want you to acknowledge, hey man, you fucked me up. And that's what they're talking about. They're not talking about their religion being recognized. Now, when you talk about the recognition of a religion, I would agree with everything you said and some. I'll talk about it in a second, but I see you're trying to say something. So Buana, go ahead.
No, sorry for interrupting, Kuku. I may have missed it, brother. I mean, if that's what she asking for, that's legitimate. So I have to eat humble pie. If she asking because the African spiritualists were persecuted, so she asking the government to acknowledge the fact that they were persecuted and acknowledge the fact that they were persecuted at one particular point in time, I have to eat humble pie. I apologize to the sister. I was wrong. If that's what it is.
Yeah, that's what's going on. Joe said, do y'all have that game telephone where you come from, where you live as a kid? Did they have the game telephone?
No, and I'm wondering what it is since you mentioned it.
Yeah, so because I mentioned it, I realized that you might not be familiar. So telephone was a kid's game where, let's say you have a line of 20 children. You start at the first kid and you whisper something in their ear.
Okay.
You know,
okay,
the
no.
lion
I know.
the bell. Then he or she passes it on. Yeah.
I know. We did it in at school in social class about propaganda.
Yeah, by the time the message gets through a couple of hands, it changes, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so that's why I wanted to make sure that it was understood. That's not what she wasn't asking for, to be recognized as a group. Although, let me just speak to that for a second. What Buana is saying, especially in the Caribbean, that's why I see it really works. You can't just run to the government or assume the government is going to handle whatever. What tends to happen, and I do think there's an opportunity there if you could wrangle it together. What tends to happen is the people do a thing, and once the people make a thing or make it popular, then the government and at the very least, you as the people have the opportunity to go to government and say, hey man, this is what we doing out here. If you ain't supporting what we doing, then we don't need you. We'll support the next group that's going to support what we're doing. And I think that's the thing that, for whatever the reason, the way the Caribbean is kind of set up, these different nations in the Caribbean, that's a thing that could kind of work. If you could get down there and propagandize a certain thought, let's say it's African-centered education, you could get the people to be talking about it, to be actually doing it in their, out their houses and this, that, and the other, to the point where you could now strong arm that government. You better go along and get along. That's how the Caribbean kind of works. I don't really see that here in the States as much, but that happens in the Caribbean. Just to speak to that for a second. Is there any other thoughts? Here on this topic. Real quick, I see Ditso joined us. Ditso, how are you this week?
Been doing well. Thank you so much for having me once again. Caught my attention this whole conversation, especially particularly talking about the Caribbean. I'm going to say this in a very simple way. The problems you're talking have to do with the lack of decolonization and the reattempt of constructing identity post-colonization and in the eras of independence that were happening here in the Western Hemisphere. The thing about the Caribbean is you have to understand that you had islands under the control of the British, under the control of the French, under the control of Netherlands, under the control of Spaniards, in that sense. So, for example, look at a place like Jamaica, which, funnily enough, has a lot of influence in my Afro community here in Costa Rica. Funnily enough, Jamaica was first conquered by the Spaniards and then taken by the British once they defeated the Spaniards. And once Jamaica became independent, which was one of the later countries in the Western Hemisphere to become independent, it unfortunately did not have, or did not reconstruct itself as ideally as one could say. But that wasn't the fault of Jamaica in that sense. By the 60s, you already had a process that was well over 100 and some odd years happening in Central America and some other places in the Caribbean, like Haiti, the República Dominicana, etc. And you already had the colonial control of the United States in Puerto Rico. And if you look at the upper side of the Bahamas, which also is another conversation there, still in their complications that had a lot of influence in that sense. And in the matters of what this person was speaking in this particular video, there is a distinct perspective, difference of perspective. When we, the Central Americans and the Afro communities or indigenous communities, or the combination of thereof, sit down with the Caribbeans, that historical difference is heavily marked, because at the same time of that clear distinction that we make of the historical difference, which I spoke on before, the difference of how our independences became, how we constructed nations, etc. The other factor which is there is the fact that we as people have pressured our own governments to, via the official ways, remind Europe, hey, you owe us reparations. And we've taken that step through the CARICOM and through the mainly through the CARICOM in that sense. So at the end, what it's funnily enough is the Anglo-speaking Black section of the Western Hemisphere, their exceptionalism and their self-centered arrogance has avoided them to sit down and realize that they could work with us in that manner to pressure and continue pressuring the historical reparations of Europe. But of course, that's just one way of getting shit done. It's not like the United States. Just last year, May, there was a Inter-American Afro Community conference in Georgia with Colombians and United States. But again, this whole conversation goes to a broader sense of, I think it's extremely difficult for people of Africa to really dwell into our history without acknowledging that we were the first ones to push for and achieve grades of independence in many ways. Some more tardy than others, but at the end, by the time Africa, the majority of Africa, excepting perhaps Libya that became independent on 1848, and another country in which escapes my mind right now. But the majority, or 90% of Africa, became independent post-World War. By that time, a lot of us, except perhaps a little bit of Jamaica, we saw the separation of Barbados from the Commonwealth just recently. They decided to separate, which sent massive shockwaves throughout countries like Jamaica, Canada, and other islands in the Caribbean that are still part of that Commonwealth. So at the end, I think that the most important thing is to sit back for a moment and understand our history, and the problem, the good, the bad, and the ugly of that particular history, that it still is ongoing, but without doubt, it will tells us in that sense. And one really interesting part of Barbados is that half of the population of 240,000 people approximately that live in Barbados, half of that population is irreligious. They do not have, nor do they identify with any sort of religious, be it official, institutional, or unofficial and non-institutional religious organization. So that calls my attention, and that's the data from the census of 4 years ago, 2021, 2021. So at the end, this whole thing's about Rastafarians, etc. Just like the Hebrew Israelites, so-called Hebrew Israelites, are just fabrications and are symptoms of the lack of work that we've had to do, and that still is owed of our decolonization post-era of independence. I hope I was clear. If you have any questions, go for it.
Yeah, good stuff. Did so. Yeah, Trigger said Barbados. Yeah, Barbados is considered a secular country where, unlike my country tells you straight up, we are a Christian nation. Barbados doesn't do that, but we know, like Juan outlined, most of the people in Barbados are Christian and Anglican, and of the Anglican variety, like I grew up under as well. So
now that we're talking about that, real quickly, if I may, can you tell me in the last 200 years, here in the Western Hemisphere, I'm just talking about here from Argentina up to Canada plus the Caribbean, 35 nations. Which of those nations have not stated that they're not a Christian nation?
The only country that I would see that come close to that is Haiti. Haiti at one time, by the way, in one time, besides the fact that they say that they was Catholic, the Papa Doc had as a state religion as voodoo. That's really the only one I could really stick a pin in and say that's the only country that came closest to that kind of thinking. But ditto, I didn't know that Barbados was a secular country. I really didn't know that. I didn't know how you say half. That's big. I didn't know that. I really didn't know that.
Yeah, it's a secular country. So actually, Haiti, and in fact, if we go back probably 30 years, you will see that there were strong movements that said Haiti was a Christian nation. In fact, Haiti, of course, there was a series of combinations between Christianity and either indigenous / Afro descendants concepts of transformations of Christianity in that sense. But out of the 35 nations here, 35 have in the last 200 years declared themselves as Christian fucking nations. That is such an empty concept, because and I had a Christian nationalist of the gringo kind, of the United States kind, tried to debate me on this, and I crushed them because I asked them, if since all 35 nations have declared themselves as Christian nations, would you say that then, if all those 35 nations are supposedly or allegedly Christian, then none of them have a superiority over which one is a better Christian? He said, no, United States is the best Christian country. And I laughed at him and I told him, then you're being anti-Christian because you're denying the Christianity of others. And if so, you are a farce. You are lying to yourself and to other Christians in order to justify your complex of superiority over other Christians.
Yeah, but so you have to be extremely careful, and here's where the problem lies in the analysis. Sometimes on paper, what the government may say may not be consistent with what the people actually believe. And as we were saying before, they used to say that Haiti is 99% Catholic but 100% voodoo. So it's sometimes there's a distinctive difference in terms of what's written on paper and what a few men in the government say in compared to what the people on the ground actually believe. Sometimes there's a vast difference, brother. So when people look at the statistics and say, well, hey, on paper, they all Christians. That might not be the reality that's actually being practiced on the ground when you're dealing with the people themselves. You know, not everyone believe in Donald Trump. You know, and not everyone is MAGA in America. But he would give the impression to the world that everyone is in line with what he's on about. Probably most of them, needless to say. But that it's not necessarily consistent because it's written on paper, and you could look up at a statistic, and this is what they say about these people. It's vast different from what actually is happening on the ground. I just want you to be careful of that fact.
Oh no, I completely understand that, and of course, I'm the first one to tell you that all the data I handle obviously emanates from the different censuses that have been done throughout the last 100 years in these different nations in the Caribbean as well as Central America, etc. But I also, based on my work and my dedication in sociology and anthropology, I tend to seek surveys that are academic, more based off the work of a XYZ university that has clear credentials, that their methodology can be replicated, etc. So I have found something which is extremely interesting in that sense. There's no doubt that people will lie or refrain from the official census type of investigation, but a non-census, non-governmental survey or approach tends to have a better result in finding out what is more predominant in that sense. And right now we see in the Western Hemisphere that there's a clear war happening between dominations of Christianity. The evangelicals have slowly but very surely throughout, Mexico, great parts of Caribbean, as well as South America, have displaced the Catholics. Because let's face it, evangelicals consider the Catholics a fake religion. This has, in the last 30, 40 years, have changed the demographics in many countries. But the Catholics are fighting back. They're expelling the evangelicals. And then the other series of dominations, like, for example, the Witness of Jehovah, Mormons, so on and so on, have fewer or lesser representation because of that particular war that is internally happening in Christianity. And another thing I have found, I don't know if you were aware of what happened in Brazil. There was this famous singer. She's from one of the denominations, the Candomblé denomination, which is a combination of Afro-Brazilian with Christianity. And she was singing her song about Candomblé, whatever. And the Catholics and the evangelicals started attacking her because she was professing a heretic type of expression of Christianity. And her answer, I consider her, even though I consider all that bullshit and I'm an atheist, I don't give a damn about religion. But her answer, I did find it very enlightening, because she turned around and she said, your Christianity is the Christianity of invasion. You forced Christianity in all these lands, but we defeated Christianity of the European kind and any other kind when we readapted Christianity to our own necessities. Of course, it's bullshit, but at the end, it's an enlightening question, because Christianity is defeated by its own hubris of trying to impose themselves into everybody without realizing that it's such a weak religion that it can be adapted to the whim of anybody else. I don't know if that made any sense.
No, you made perfect sense. No. I think that he made perfect sense. Beyonce, for the English speaking crowd, also used symbolism of African symbolism in a lot of her performances as well, and she was attacked by a lot of Christian people, black Christian people, by the way, calling her devil because they don't understand. But I believe that but because she's an English speaking world, she's attacked similar to the sister in Brazil. The same things are going on. There's always going to be a whitewashing of our religions. There's always going to be a whitewashing, unfortunately. But for the people who want to carry that line, like I say, I leave the holy man alone, because the holy man have a job to do, just like Ditto have a job to do as a pragmatist. So it is what it is. It is what it is, man.
Yeah, I get where you're coming from. Yeah, my job is to remind people religion is BS. The best way of being free is as far as you can from any sort of religion, and that here in the Western Hemisphere, we defeated the Europeans regardless of their gods or our use of those gods because of colonialism. So at the end, my job is to remind everybody there's no Christian nations whatsoever.
Good conversation there. Good conversation. Just a reminder that topic was about persecution, religious persecution, and seeking reparative justice for it. With that said, man, let's go to Shoot the Breeze. Mute y'all's mic for me, please. I can hear someone typing or something. Let's go to Shoot the Breeze topic number 4 tonight. I want to thank everyone who participated tonight on the panel. We're going to end around 11. I want to thank everyone who's participating in the chat. I see Joe just joined us and said good evening. So good evening to Joe and others. Shout out to Black Steel. Black Steel was the topic of a comment left on a video recently. Shout out to him. Hope all is well with him.